It's been a while since I last saw the Puget Sound without a knot in my stomach. The salt air used to be a balm, a reminder of the vastness, the endless possibilities. Now, it just smells like freedom, a freedom I fought tooth and nail for, a freedom that cost me everything I thought I was. I'm Alex, by the way, 35, a writer, or at least, I used to be, before silence became my truest language. My stories, they were always the most intricate tapestries, woven with threads of human complexity, characters that breathed and bled and loved and lost in ways that felt profoundly real. That was my gift, or so I believed. My greatest dream was to share them, to see them out there, touching other souls. A sensitive soul, I've been called, prone to seeing the world in shades of gray and finding beauty in the nuanced. It was this sensitivity, I think, that made me so susceptible, so utterly blind. I met Sophia at a literary mixer, one of those loud, clinking events in a downtown Seattle loft, all glass and polished concrete. She was an agent, sharp-edged and brilliant, with eyes that seemed to dissect every person in the room. I was immediately drawn to her energy, her undeniable charisma. She smiled at me, a quick, assessing curve of her lips, and asked me what I wrote. I told her about the Obsidian Labyrinth, the manuscript I'd poured 5 years of my life into, a sprawling historical fantasy that explored themes of identity and legacy through a forgotten civilization. She listened, really listened, her gaze intense, and then she said something that made my heart leap. That sounds unique, Alex. Truly unique. Send me a synopsis. She saw me, I thought. She understood. Our relationship bloomed quickly after that. She championed my early chapters, praising my prose, my imagination. It felt like destiny. She was the fire, I was the quiet flame, and together, we'd conquer the literary world. We moved into a charming craftsman house in Fremont, a place with a tiny writing nook overlooking the canal. I wrote every day, fueled by her belief in me, or what I perceived as her belief. My closest friend, Kevin, a fellow writer I'd known since college, was also part of this idyllic picture. We'd meet at our usual coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and the clatter of keyboards, sharing our progress, our struggles. Kevin always understood the intricacies of my plots, the depth of my characters. He'd read every draft of the Obsidian Labyrinth, offering thoughtful feedback, cheering me on. He was my anchor, my sounding board. The first whispers of discord came subtly, like a shift in the wind before a storm. Sophia started to say things like, "Alex, darling, your voice is extraordinary, but it's a lot. For the mainstream, I mean." Or, "Have you considered simplifying this subplot? It might confuse readers." Initially, I took it as constructive criticism, professional guidance. She was an agent, after all. She knew the market. I'd nod, make notes, try to adapt. But the suggestions grew more frequent, more insistent. "It's not commercial enough, Alex." That phrase became a dull throb behind my eyes. "You need to make it more accessible, less introspective, more action-oriented." My heart, which had once soared with the sheer joy of creating, began to feel a weight settle upon it. The characters I loved, the intricate worlds I built, suddenly felt wrong, defective. I'd spend hours staring at my laptop, the cursor blinking mockingly, trying to prune and simplify, feeling like I was amputating limbs from my own creation. The joy of writing withered, replaced by a constant hum of anxiety. Then Kevin, my rock, my literary brother, started to echo Sophia. It wasn't overt at first, just a gentle, "You know, Alex, Sophia has a point about that narrative thread. It does get a little dense." Or, "Maybe simplifying the prose in chapter 6 wouldn't hurt. Make it flow faster, you know." It was like a slow, insidious poison entering my system. The man who had once celebrated my complex vision now subtly chipped away at it. I'd bring up Sophia's specific criticisms during our coffee sessions, trying to work through them, and Kevin would often use similar phrasing, almost verbatim. "Commercial appeal, Alex, that's what Sophia always says. It's tough out there." My head would spin. Was I really so out of touch? Was my unique voice actually a flaw? Doubt gnawed at me, hollowing me out. My writing became a chore, an exercise in trying to conform to an ever-shifting ideal that was never quite me. I started to resent the words, the blank page. The silence began to stretch, not just between writing sessions, but within me. One evening, I found Sophia and Kevin huddled over my manuscript on the dining table, their heads close together, whispering. When I walked in, they both straightened abruptly, a little too quickly. Kevin cleared his throat, a nervous gesture. Sophia smiled, a little too brightly. Just brainstorming, darling, she said, gathering up the pages a little too fast. Kevin was just giving some excellent ideas on how to make your exposition punchier. My stomach clenched. Punchier, accessible, commercial. It felt like they were talking about a product, not a story I had poured my soul into. I tried to voice my discomfort. I feel like I'm losing the essence of what I wanted to say. I confessed, my voice quiet. Almost a plea. Sophia laughed, a dismissive, airy sound. Don't be dramatic, Alex. This is the industry. You want to be a serious author, don't you? Sometimes you have to make compromises. Kevin understands that. Kevin nodded solemnly, avoiding my gaze. It was then, seeing them together, seeing Kevin's complicity, that a cold, awful dread began to seep into my bones. It wasn't just my writing they were reshaping, it was my reality. They were making me question my own sanity, my own artistic intuition. Gaslighting, I know now. But back then, I just felt a profound, lonely confusion. The real breaking point arrived with the cruel precision of a well-crafted plot twist. It was a private publishing event, exclusive and buzzing, held in a sleek art gallery. Sophia had insisted I attend, saying it was good for networking. But there was an underlying tension in her voice I couldn't place. I felt out of place, a ghost in my own life, sipping lukewarm champagne while agents and editors buzzed around me like predatory bees. Then, the announcement. Sophia, radiant in a crimson dress, stepped onto a small stage. She commanded attention effortlessly. My chest tightened as she began to speak, her voice smooth and confident. She introduced her newest star author, beaming as she called Kevin to join her. Kevin, my friend, looking uncomfortable but also undeniably proud, walked up. My heart began to pound a frantic, irregular rhythm. Sophia's words, though, were what shattered the world around me. We're incredibly excited to announce Kevin Miller's debut novel, Echoes of the Labyrinth, she declared, her arm around Kevin's shoulder. It's a truly groundbreaking historical fantasy, set in a meticulously imagined, long-lost civilization, exploring themes of identity and legacy through a thrilling, accessible narrative. The words hit me like physical blows. Long-lost civilization, identity, legacy, labyrinth, my Obsidian Labyrinth. The air grew thin, my vision blurred. It was my story, my intricate, deeply personal story, laid bare and simplified, made accessible, announced to the world by the woman who was supposed to be my partner and the friend who was supposed to be my confidant. I could hear snippets of her continuing, a streamlined, propulsive plot, a fresh, commercial voice. My own voice, stolen, mangled. A cold rage, sharp and unfamiliar, sliced through the numbness. I pushed through the elegant crowd, my hands shaking, my breath catching in my throat. I grabbed Kevin's arm, my grip probably too tight. What the hell is this, Kevin? I whispered, my voice ragged, barely audible over the polite applause. My book? You're publishing my book. He flinched, pulling his arm away. His eyes darted nervously to Sophia, then back to me, full of a pathetic guilt. Alex, listen, it's not like that. Sophia and we just collaborated. We took your framework, but we made it marketable. Your version was just too much for the mainstream. We're making it accessible. His words, a direct echo of every painful critique Sophia had ever leveled at me, twisted the knife deeper. Before I could respond, Sophia stepped between us, her face a mask of cool disdain. Honestly, Alex, she interjected, her voice dripping with an almost theatrical pity. You just weren't enough to make it happen, darling. That was it. The final, crushing blow. You just weren't enough, not my writing, not my style. Me. I felt it physically, a collapse deep inside my chest, like a grand structure imploding under its own weight. The world spun. The murmuring crowd, the clinking glasses, Sophia's triumphant smile, Kevin's cowardly gaze. It all receded into a distorted hum. I stumbled backward, away from them, away from the glittering, deceitful tableau, needing air, needing to escape the suffocating presence of their betrayal. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief. I locked myself in the house, a prisoner of my own shattered dreams. My writing nook, once a sanctuary, became a torture chamber. I couldn't look at my laptop without a wave of nausea. Every word felt tainted. Every character, a cruel mockery. Sophia's chilling pronouncement echoed in my mind. An insidious mantra. You just weren't enough. It seeped into every corner of my being, confirming every insecurity I had ever harbored. I barely ate, barely slept. The vibrant colors of Seattle, the comforting rain, everything seemed to lose its saturation, turning to shades of gray. I felt hollowed out, a host haunting my own life. It wasn't just a story that had been stolen. It was my identity, my voice, my very essence as a creative being. I had invested so much of myself into the Obsidian Labyrinth, believed so deeply in its power, and they had taken it, stripped it bare, and rebranded it as something cheap and commercial. The emotional collapse was profound. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, simply staring at the ceiling, replaying every condescending remark, every subtle manipulation, every instance where I had dismissed my own intuition in favor of their expertise. The anger was a slow burn, simmering beneath the surface, but mostly it was just a vast, aching emptiness. I cried until there were no more tears, until my eyes felt gritty and dry. I screamed into pillows until my throat was raw. I allowed myself to feel the absolute, unadulterated pain of a heart ripped open. But in that darkness, something shifted. Very slowly, like a tiny seed pushing through frozen earth, a stubborn resolve began to take root. The initial devastation began to give way to a searing clarity. The anger, once directed inward, turned outward. They were wrong. They were the ones who lacked integrity. They were the ones who were small. Sophia hadn't just rejected my writing. She had rejected me because I wouldn't conform, because my voice was too individual, too strong for her to control. Kevin, his complicity was a wound that would never fully heal, but it also served as a stark lesson in trust. I saw them for what they truly were, opportunists, willing to sacrifice authenticity for profit, friendship for advancement. The awakening was agonizing, but liberating. I started by cutting them out of my life, completely. I left Sophia. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic shouting match. Just a quiet packing of my bags, a silent walk out the door of the house we'd shared. She tried to call, to text, painting herself as the wronged party, suggesting I was being irrational and overly sensitive. I blocked her number. I unfriended Kevin on every platform. The silence, initially terrifying, began to feel like a protective cloak. I moved into a small apartment in a different neighborhood, one where the old ghosts wouldn't follow me down every street. I sold most of my old furniture, bought new, simpler pieces. I needed a fresh start, a clean slate. The first steps were clumsy, painful, but each one felt like I was reclaiming a tiny piece of myself. For months, I couldn't write fiction. The idea of crafting another story, another world, felt like an impossible betrayal of the self I was slowly trying to rebuild. But the urge to process, to understand, to simply speak my truth was overwhelming. So, I started writing. Not fiction, not fantasy. I wrote about them. About her. About Kevin. About the slow, insidious erosion of my confidence, the gaslighting, the gut-wrenching betrayal. I wrote about the pain, the anger, the feeling of having my soul stripped bare. I wrote about what it felt like to be told I wasn't enough. It was raw, ugly, unpolished. It was everything Sophia would have deemed uncommercial, too personal, too much. I didn't write it for an audience. I wrote it for me. It was a memoir, a confession, a testament to what had been lost and what was being found. I poured every ounce of my sensitive, nuanced soul into it, holding nothing back. I wrote about the weight in my chest, the way my hands would tremble, the constant hum of anxiety, the cold dread. I described the smell of the coffee shop, the way the light fell on Sophia's face when she lied, the precise wording of Kevin's echoing critiques. I wrote until my fingers ached, until my eyes burned, until the story of my suffering and my survival filled hundreds of pages. And then, one day, it was done. It wasn't a novel. It was my heart laid bare. The thought of putting it out into the world, of exposing such vulnerability, was terrifying. But the alternative, Keeping my truth hidden, letting their version of events stand, felt like an even greater betrayal of myself. I knew no traditional publisher would touch it. It wasn't commercial. It wasn't neat. It wasn't easily categorized. It was just me. So I self-published. I titled it, with a quiet defiance, The Unwritten Story, a direct challenge to the silence they had imposed on me. I designed a simple cover, uploaded it to a few online platforms, and then I stepped away, holding my breath, preparing for it to sink into oblivion. It didn't. Not immediately, not with a bang. But slowly, steadily, something shifted. A review popped up, then another. People started to find it. Readers connected with the raw honesty, the painful authenticity. They saw themselves in the struggle for self-worth, the experience of emotional abuse, the quiet courage of reclaiming one's voice. It wasn't a bestseller, not in the commercial sense Sophia chased, but it found its audience, a cult following of people who understood, people who felt seen. Emails started to arrive, messages from strangers thanking me for telling my story, for giving voice to their own hidden wounds. That's when the true healing began. Not the forgetting, but the acceptance. The affirmation that my voice, my unique, complex, deeply personal voice, was not a flaw, but a gift. I am a truthful storyteller, not a commercial success by their metrics. And that, I realized, was far more valuable. I still write, but now I write for myself first, and for those who seek genuine connection, not facile entertainment. The Obsidian Labyrinth remains unfinished on my hard drive, a testament to a different time, a different Alex. Maybe one day I'll revisit it, but not for Sophia, not for Kevin, not for the mainstream. Only for me, and for the story itself, waiting patiently to be told in its true, unadulterated form. The knot in my stomach is gone now. The salt air of the sound smells purely of freedom, of the vast, open ocean, and the endless stories still waiting to be told, in my own, unapologetic voice.